My son looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You're dead weight, Dad. Get out." He said that standing in the doorway of a house my money paid for, while a nor'easter was ripping through Gloucester at 20 below. 8 months earlier, I had sold my family's waterfront home, 3 generations of Callaways, to save him from drowning in debt. That night, he let me drown instead. But the ocean had other plans for me. Thank you for being here and staying with this story. Before we continue, I would really love to know where you are watching from today. Drop your city or country in the comments so we can connect. Also, please note this story includes a few fictional elements added for storytelling and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people or settings is purely coincidental, but the message I am sharing is meant to be meaningful and helpful. I was sitting in his living room when it happened. The leather recliner beneath me had a tear along the left arm that I had offered to fix twice. Dylan always said he would get around to it. I had been sitting there for an hour, trying to make myself invisible, which is a strange thing for a man who spent 40 years building structures meant to survive hurricanes. Outside, the harbor had vanished behind a wall of gray. I could feel the pressure dropping in my bad knee. Every engineer knows what falling pressure means. 8 months I had been living in Dylan's spare bedroom, ever since I sold the house on Atlantic Road. My grandfather built that foundation in 1932 with stones he pulled from the harbor. My father raised me in those rooms. Margaret and I raised Dylan there, right on the water where you could hear waves through the bedroom window like a lullaby. I signed it away for $350,000. Every cent went to cover Dylan's debts. A real estate deal gone wrong, the kind that comes with people who send threats, not letters. He called me at 2 in the morning, voice shaking. "Dad, I need help." "What do you do?" "You help." That is what fathers do. I walked away with nothing but his promise. "Stay with me, Dad. This is your home now, too." That promise had an expiration date. Dylan's truck pulled in at 8:30. Through the window, I saw Vanessa in the passenger seat, phone glowing against her face. 29 years old, worked at some real estate firm in Boston, made sure everyone knew she was going places that did not include a 65-year-old man down the hall. The front door opened and the cold came in first. Not a draft. A wall. Dad. Not hey or evening. Just my title. Flat and heavy. "Evening, son. There is leftover chowder. We need to talk." He did not take off his coat. Vanessa came in behind him. "Baby," she said, touching his arm. "Let us discuss this in the bedroom first." They disappeared down the hallway. I could hear voices through the walls. Hers insistent, his reluctant. When Dylan came back, his face had changed. The reluctance was gone. "Vanessa and I need our space. Having you here is not working." "Son, I do not eat much," I said. I heard the pleading in my voice and hated it. "My social security check is coming. I can find work. You're 65 years old. I am capable. You're dead weight. Sharp. Final. You need to leave. Tonight." I looked at the window. Glass shaking. Snow sideways. "Dylan, it is 20 below. Can this wait until morning?" "No." Vanessa appeared in the hallway, arms crossed. Tonight, I stood slowly. My knees cracked. Something flickered across Dylan's face. The ghost of the boy who used to grab my hand on the dock when waves got big. Gone before I could name it. "Please." I looked past Vanessa. "I gave up everything for you, and I appreciated it, Dad." Past tense. "You have 15 minutes. It took me 6 minutes." Heavy coat. 2 changes of clothes in Margaret's old duffel bag. Reading glasses. My notebook. Because engineers write things down, I reached for the photo album on the nightstand. Dylan. As a baby. Margaret holding him on the beach. The 3 of us in front of the Callaway house, harbor sparkling behind us. My hands shook, but I grabbed it. Some things you do not leave behind. Dylan was holding the front door open. Cold poured through like the ocean through a breached hull. "I am sorry," he said, not meeting my eyes. I walked past him. The cold hit like a rogue wave. Behind me, Vanessa's voice, bright and satisfied. "Finally. Now, I can turn that room into my studio." The door clicked shut. Not slammed. Deliberate. Like a decision made long before tonight. The porch light went off. Through the window, Dylan stood motionless. I thought he might open that door. Instead, he pulled the curtain closed. A memory hit me. Dylan at 5, sitting in the bow of my skiff. Water choppy, wind rising. He looked back with wide eyes. "Are we going to tip over, Dad?" I had gripped the tiller and said, "I have got the helm, buddy. I will not let us capsize." I kept that promise every time. Now here I was. 65. 20 below. Standing on a porch that was no longer mine. My son had not let go of the helm. He had thrown me overboard. I walked down the steps. Snow swallowed my footprints as fast as I made them. The house shrank behind me until the windows were smears of light. Then nothing. Nowhere to go. No money. No plan. Just the clothes on my back, the bag in my hand, and the cold working into my bones. But beyond the dark, I could hear the ocean. Restless. Relentless. It did not care that I had been thrown away. It just kept moving, crashing against the shore the way it had for 10,000 years. I did not know it yet. The ocean was calling me towards something. A rusted boxcar on forgotten tracks. A lighthouse that had not burned in years. A second chance I had not earned. I just had to survive the night first. They say the human body shuts down after about 3 hours in 20 below zero. I knew the math because engineers always know the math, even when they wish they did not. Core temperature drops 1 degree every 40 minutes without shelter. Below 95 degrees, your muscles stop cooperating. Below 90, your brain starts lying to you. Tells you to lie down. Tells you to sleep. Tells you everything is going to be fine. Everything was not fine. I had been walking for maybe 15 minutes, heading downhill toward the waterfront because that was the only direction my feet seemed to know. 40 years of driving to lighthouses along this coast had carved the route into my body. My face was already numb. My ears burned with a cold so sharp it felt like someone was pressing hot iron against them. Each breath was a small war. Frozen air scraping down my throat like broken glass. The wind came off the Atlantic in gusts that staggered me sideways. I could taste salt in it, salt and something metallic, the taste of a storm that was not finished yet. Snow was not falling, it was being thrown. Horizontal, white bullets that stung every exposed inch of skin. The church was 2 blocks to my left. I could see the white steeple of St. Andrew's rising against the dark sky. Reverend Paul Ainsley had preached there for 12 years. Margaret and I used to attend services back when Dylan was small, and we were still a family that did things together. I could knock on that door. Explain my situation. The Reverend would take me in, but he would also look at me with that particular expression. The one that weighs your sins before offering grace. I could already hear the questions. What did you do, Frank? What choices led you here? As if being thrown away by your own son was a math problem with a solution I had simply failed to calculate. I kept walking. The Gloucester Inn sat at the corner of Main and Harbor, a brick building with a green awning, and a sign that read $35 a night. $35 I did not have. Dylan had been managing my Social Security checks for months, said he was putting them toward household expenses. I had not seen a bank statement since July. I kept walking. Mabel Torres ran the general store on Wharf Street. I could see a light on in the apartment above it. She had known Margaret. She had known Dylan as a boy who stole penny candy and always got caught because he could not stop grinning. Mabel was kind. She would help, but knocking on that door meant saying the words out loud. My son threw me out. I have nothing. I need help. I was not ready for those words yet. Maybe I would never be ready. So I kept walking toward the harbor, toward the part of Gloucester that tourists never visit. Past the lobster shacks shuttered for winter. Past the fuel depot with its rusted tanks. Past the old fish processing plant that closed in 2009 and took half the town's jobs with it. The streetlights ended at Harbor Road. Beyond that, the waterfront was all shadows and shapes. The old rail yard spread before me. Not much of a yard anymore. Just a single spur line that used to carry refrigerated freight cars full of cod and haddock from the processing plant to the distribution center in Worcester. When the plant closed, the railroad forgot about this spur, the way you forget about a dead-end road that leads nowhere useful. Tracks buried under snow, signals dark, and lined up along the siding like sleeping animals. 4 boxcars. Rusted. Forgotten. Abandoned. I walked toward them because there was nowhere else to walk. The first car was open, door hanging off its hinges. Snow had drifted inside, filling it halfway. Useless. The second had collapsed partially, roof caved in under the weight of years. The third was locked somehow. Frozen solid. And my fingers were too numb to work the mechanism. The fourth car sat at the end of the siding, closest to the water. I could hear waves crashing against the breakwater, maybe 200 feet beyond it. The sliding door was partially open, maybe 1.5 feet. I grabbed the handle and pulled. Nothing. Rust had welded it to the track. Salt air had done what salt air always does to steel, eaten it slow and patient. I planted my boots, gripped with both hands, and pulled with everything my 65-year-old body had left. For a long second, nothing happened. Then the door shrieked along its frozen track, metal screaming against metal, and the opening widened enough for a man and a duffel bag. I stood there looking into the darkness inside. My engineering brain was already assessing. Steel frame. Good. The car had been built to carry frozen fish across New England, which meant insulated walls, thicker than a standard freight car. That was something. The opening felt like a mouth, dark and uncertain, and not particularly inviting. But I was out of time, and out of choices. I climbed inside. The darkness was total. Not the darkness of a room at night, but the sealed darkness of a metal box that had not seen light in years. It pressed against my eyes. The smell came next. Old fish. Faint, but there. Rust. Something musty and cold, but no animal waste. No rot. Nothing living had used this space in a long time. I fumbled for the matchbox I had grabbed from Dylan's kitchen counter. One of the few things I managed to take in those 15 minutes. My fingers were so numb, I dropped 2 matches before I got one lit. The flame flared bright after the absolute dark. I turned slowly. 30 feet long, 8 feet wide. Wooden floor over steel. Dirty but solid. Insulated walls with steel panels. Some rust spots on the ceiling where moisture had crept in over the years, but no active leaks. No snow on the floor in the back half. The roof was holding. I let the match burn down and made my way to the far corner. Drees spot. Most protected. I sat down with my back against the cold wall, pulled my duffel bag close, and wrapped my arms around myself. My body shook. It would not stop, but I was out of the wind. The temperature inside was still well below freezing, but maybe 10 or 15 degrees warmer than outside. That margin might keep me alive until morning. Through the walls I could hear the ocean. Not muffled. Almost clear. Rhythmic. Steady. Like a heartbeat. That was not mine. I closed my eyes. My mind replayed the evening in fragments. Dylan's face. Vanessa's voice. The curtain closing. The porch light going dark. The long walk through the killing cold to this steel box that smelled like fish and rust and loneliness. But I was alive. I made myself a promise in that darkness. I would not die here. I would survive this night and the next, and however many came after. I did not know how. Did not have a plan or a dollar or a single person expecting me to wake up tomorrow. But Margaret used to say something. She would stand at the kitchen window watching the harbor, coffee in her hands, and she would say, "The sea always provides, Frank, even when it takes." I held on to those words. Let them wrap around me the way her arms used to in. Outside, the waves kept crashing. Inside, my breathing slowed, and somewhere between, I woke to a sound that was not the ocean and was not the wind. A whimper, weak and close and alive. Something outside the boxcar, something out there in the cold, needed help just as much as I did. I did not go outside that first night. Heard that whimper through the steel wall and my whole body wanted to move. But the engineer in me did the math. Wind chill, pushing 40 below. Opening that door meant losing whatever heat my body had trapped. So I pressed my palm against the cold metal, listened to that sound fade into the storm, and I stayed. Hardest decision I made that night. Whatever was out there survived. I know because the first thing I heard when I woke was not the ocean. It was breathing. Faint. Ragged. Just outside the door. But before I opened my eyes, I felt the frost. Tiny crystals on my eyebrows, crunching when I blinked. Salt frost, grittier than the inland kind. Proof the ocean had been breathing on me all night. Proof I had been warm enough to create condensation. Warm enough to live. Light crept through gaps in the steel panels. Thin gray strips. More suggestion than illumination. I could finally see what I had gotten into. I did not move right away. Every joint had seized overnight. But I did what engineers do. Took inventory. Fingers moved. Toes moved. Burned like fire. But all 10 accounted for. No blackening. I stood slow, knees cracking like gravel, and looked around. The boxcar was better than I had hoped. Double-paneled steel with insulation between. Built for hauling frozen fish across New England winters. A gift. But the panels had separated in places, wind pouring through every gap. I pulled out my notebook and wrote 4 words. Insulation. Heat. Water. Food. I slid the door open. Morning hit me cold and brilliant. Sky the kind of blue that only follows a spent storm. Harbor stretched below. Steel gray water chopping against docks. And there on the point of land curving north into the Atlantic, I saw it. A white tower rising against that sky. Cape Ann Light. 40 years I had maintained lighthouses along this coast. I knew that tower. Third-order Fresnel lens, built 1861. I had signed the decommission order myself in 2019 when the Coast Guard switched to automated systems. Walked away, assuming someone would take care of it. Nobody had. I stared at it. Then wrote 2 words below my list. Cape Ann. Did not know why yet. The harbor scrapyard was a quarter-mile south. Not a proper junkyard, just where old fishing equipment came to die. I worked through it section by section. Canvas tarps from a trawler. Still mostly waterproof. Newspaper bundles, damp, but usable. Burlap sacking. Tin cans. And buried under broken lobster traps. A cast iron pot with a small crack. Fixable. A voice came from behind me while I dragged the canvas free. Digging through trash now, Frank? Knew low. I did not turn around. Kept pulling. They walked away muttering. I did not owe them anything. I loaded up and started back. Halfway there, cutting along the old wharf, I heard it again. That whimper from last night. Not wind, not a gull. Coming from underneath the wharf. I set down my load. Walked toward the sound. Slow, careful, boots crunching on frozen gravel. Under the wharf, where pilings met shore and the wind could not quite reach, I found him. Matted yellow fur, crusted with dried salt. One ear torn. Ribs showing through his coat like the frame of a boat with the planking stripped away. Back left leg tucked at an angle that meant pain. But those brown eyes looked up at me, and something passed between us. Recognition. 2 creatures the ocean had thrown away, meeting in the wreckage. I crouched down, held out my hand. He sniffed once, twice, eyes never leaving my face. "I am not going to hurt you," I said. Then thought, "You are talking to a dog, Frank." But it felt good to talk to something alive. I reached into my coat pocket. Half a granola bar, stale, from before Dylan's house. The last food from that life. I looked at it, looked at the dog. My stomach had been empty since yesterday, but this dog was dying. Those ribs, that shaking. "Here." I broke it in half. "You need this more than I do." I tossed a piece. He flinched like it might hurt him. Sniffed. Ate it so fast his jaw barely moved. I tossed the rest. Gone. Then he crawled forward, just inches, and licked my hand once. Quick. Testing whether I was real. "Yeah," I said, throat closing up. "Okay. You can come with me." I named him Neptune because the sea had sent him, and Margaret always said the sea provides. "Come on, Nep. Let us go home." Home. Strange word for a rusted boxcar. But it was all either of us had. He followed me. Limping, slow, resting every few steps. When we reached the boxcar, I lifted him inside. So light. Maybe 25 pounds where 50 should have been. I made him a bed from the burlap. He circled it twice, lay down, and let out a sigh that seemed to empty him completely. The sound of a creature that could finally stop holding on. I worked on the walls while he slept. Newspaper into the gaps. Canvas over the worst spots. Not perfect, but the wind dropped by half. The cracked pot I set aside for melting snow. The kerosene lamp needed work but had potential. Everything had potential if you looked at it right. Sun went down. Cold crept back. I settled into my corner. Nep lifted his head, walked over, and pressed himself against my side. Warm body, steady heartbeat against my ribs. "Thanks, buddy," I whispered. That night I slept better than I had in months. Even at Dylan's house I had not slept like this, because there I had been truly alone. Someone nearby, sure, but no one who chose to stay. Nep chose. That difference was everything. I woke once in the dark. His breathing steady against me. For the first time since that door closed, I was not by myself. That thought carried me back to sleep. Morning came with footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. The boots of someone with authority over this ground. Nep growled low, pressing into my leg. "Easy, boy," I said. "Let me handle this." The knock was not polite. 2 hard raps on the steel door, the kind that says, "I have a clipboard, and I am not leaving until someone answers." Nep pressed tighter against my leg, that low rumble still going in his chest. "Hello? Anyone inside?" "This is Harbor Authority." My heart kicked. Harbor Authority. Of course. This boxcar sat on port land. Probably belonged to some railroad company. Or the Harbor Commission. Or both. I had been so focused on not dying that I had forgotten the simple fact that none of this was mine. I stood up. Every muscle protested. "Just a minute," I called out. I looked at Nep. He looked at me. Ears flat. Body tense. Ready to defend a home he had owned for exactly 1 night. "Easy," I said. "Stay." I slid the door open maybe 2 feet. Morning light poured in along with cold air and the face of a man I had never met. Mid-40s. Harbor uniform. Navy blue with a patch on the chest that read Gloucester Harbor Authority. Clipboard. In one hand. Clean-shaven, serious, but not hostile. Behind him, a white truck idled on the access road, exhaust curling in the cold. "Morning," he said. Looked past me into the boxcar, then back to my face. "I am Jim Prescott, harbor master. Frank Calloway, Mr. Calloway." He wrote something down. "Mind if I ask what you are doing in there?" I could have invented a story. Passing through, fell asleep, did not mean anything by it. But lies, take energy, I did not have. I'm going through some difficulties, I said. Kept my voice level. Did not mention Dylan. Did not explain. I needed somewhere to stay. Jim nodded like he had heard this before. His eyes moved past me again, slower this time. I watched them track across the newspaper, stuffed into the wall gaps. The canvas layered over the worst spots. The burlap bed I had made for Nep. The organized corner where I had stacked my supplies. He spent a long time looking at the walls. You did this insulation work? He asked. Yes, sir. The double-layer technique. Loose material for air pockets, then a vapor barrier over top. I blinked. Most people would not notice. Most people would see trash shoved into cracks. That is a saltwater insulation method, Jim continued. Coast Guard teaches it for emergency shelters on offshore installations. How do you know it? I was a maritime engineer. Lighthouse maintenance. 40 years. Something shifted in his face. Not quite surprise. More like a puzzle piece clicking into place. He wrote something else on his clipboard. Mr. Calloway, I understand your situation, but this is harbor property. Specifically, it belongs to the Gloucester Port Commission, and these boxcars are scheduled for removal next fiscal year. You are trespassing. There it was. That word. I nodded because he was right. Now, Jim said, I could call the police. Have you removed today? Standard procedure. He paused. Looked at me. Really looked. The way you assess a structure before deciding whether to condemn it or reinforce it. But I am not going to do that. Something loosened in my chest. Just a fraction. You have two options, he said. 1. You leave within 48 hours. Pack up. Move on. Matter closed. He checked his clipboard. 2. You pay rent. $10 a week. I will file it as a temporary occupancy permit. Keeps you legal. Keeps me out of trouble with the commission. $10 a week. I stared at him. $10 might as well have been 10,000. I do not have that right now, I said. My voice sounded wrong. Small. Jim nodded slowly. Looked at the boxcar one more time. Then he did something I was not expecting. He tucked his pen behind his ear and was quiet for a moment. Not the uncomfortable quiet of someone who wants to leave. The quiet of someone thinking. I have a daughter, he said. Changed his tone completely. Softer. Lily. She is 7. I did not understand what that had to do with anything. So I waited. If something happened to me and my wife, he said. And his voice got rougher. If Lily ended up somewhere like this, alone, no one to help her, I would hope to God that whoever found her would show mercy. My throat closed. Could not breathe properly. Keep your money this week, Mr. Calloway. You have got until Friday next. That gives you 9 days to come up with $10. Can you manage that? I managed a nod. Words were not available. Good. He started to turn away, then stopped. Looked back at the boxcar one more time. At the walls, the careful work. That insulation. He said, It is better than what I have seen on actual Coast Guard vessels. Whoever you were before this, Mr. Calloway, you knew what you were doing. I had good training. I can see that. He almost smiled. Almost. One more thing. That lighthouse on the point, Cape Ann Light. You can see it from here, correct? I glanced over my shoulder. Through the open door, the white tower was visible on the headland, bright against the gray sky. I see it every morning, I said. Coast Guard decommissioned it 3 years ago. Nobody has been up there since. It is just sitting there, falling apart. He shrugged. Seems like a waste, does it not? A man who knows lighthouses, living a quarter mile from one that nobody wants. He did not say anything else about it. Just nodded once, walked back to his truck, climbed in, and drove away down the access road. I watched until the truck disappeared around the harbor curve. Then my legs quit. I sat down on the boxcar floor right there in the doorway. Nep came over immediately, pushed his head into my chest. I wrapped my arms around him because there was nothing else to hold on to. $10 a week. 9 days to find it. No job, no prospects. No one in this town who would hire a 65-year-old man who slept in a rail car and smelled like salt and rust. But Jim Prescott had looked at me and seen something. Not a vagrant. Not a problem. A man who knew how to build things. A man whose work was worth noticing. And he had mentioned the lighthouse. Not casually, deliberately. Like he was planting a seed and trusting me to know what to do with it. I looked out at Cape Ann Light. White tower. Dark lantern room. Sitting there on the rocks. Waiting. I kept lighthouses alive for 40 years. I said to Nep. Now I need to figure out how to keep myself alive. He licked my face. I took that as encouragement. I pulled out my notebook. Below the survival list, below Cape Ann, I wrote, $10. 9 days. Tomorrow I would walk into Gloucester and ask for work. Tomorrow I would stand in front of people who might have already heard about the old man in the boxcar, and I would ask them to give me a chance. But tonight I had shelter. I had Nep. I had 9 days. We will figure it out, buddy. I told him. He wagged his tail once. Weak. But there. Yeah. We will figure it out. I did not make it into town that first morning. Town came to me. Donna Hargrove was standing maybe 20 feet from the boxcar when I stepped outside. Just standing there in her good wool coat, scarf wrapped tight, looking at my home the way people look at roadkill, fascinated and disgusted in equal measure. I recognized her immediately. Wife of the bait shop owner on Main Street, 52 years old. Knew everybody. Talked about everybody. The kind of woman who could turn a rumor into gospel before lunch. Frank Calloway, she said like she had won something. My word. You are actually living in here, Mrs. Hargrove. I kept my voice level. Can I help you with something? Help me? She laughed. Not a kind sound. No, dear. I am just shocked, is all. A Calloway. Living in a fish car. What would your Margaret say? I did not answer that. Could not. She had no right to put Margaret's name in her mouth. Does Dylan know? She followed me as I started walking. Actually followed me. Does your son know you are living like this? What did you do to make him throw you out? That poor boy. Mrs. Hargrove. I am exhausted. Please excuse me. Her face changed. Offense. Bright and sharp. Well, people will talk, Frank. They will want to know what kind of man ends up in a boxcar. Let them talk, I said. And walked toward town. By noon, every soul in Gloucester knew. I could feel it. The way conversation stopped when I entered a room. The way eyes followed me down the sidewalk. Donna Hargrove had done her work with the efficiency of a nor'easter, blowing through every coffee shop and hair salon and church pew in town. I tried the boatyard first. Made sense. I knew marine equipment, new repairs, new structures. The foreman looked up from his desk, saw me, and his face closed like a door. Morning. I saw you might need help with. We need younger hands, Frank. Sorry. Nothing personal. It was entirely personal. I could see the help wanted notice still pinned to the board behind him. The seafood restaurant on Harbor Street. The manager barely let me finish. Insurance liability, sir. We cannot hire someone without a fixed address. She looked at my coat, my boots, the salt stains. I am sorry. The marine supply store. The owner saw me coming through the window. Shook his head once before I reached the door. Did not even let me inside. 4 days I walked that town. 4 days of knocking and asking and watching people decide I was not worth the risk. Each day a little harder. Each rejection, wearing away something I could not name. Bobby Hargrove found me on day 3. Donna's son, 24 years old. Never held a steady job, but always had opinions. He was with two friends outside the coffee shop when I walked past. "Hey, Shipwreck Frank. Loud enough for the whole street. Find any good driftwood today?" His friends laughed. I kept walking. "My mom says you must have done something real bad for your own kid to dump you like that." My hands clenched inside my pockets. I kept walking. "What was it, Frank? You steal from him? Drink? What kind of father gets thrown out like garbage?" Their laughter followed me 2 blocks. I let it. You do not survive 4 decades working on exposed scaffolding in Atlantic storms by reacting to every gust of wind. You plant your feet, and you hold. But the wind was getting stronger. Reverend Paul Ainsley caught me near the church on day 4. Stepped out of St. Andrew's like he had been watching from the window, which he probably had. "Frank." That voice. Warm like a furnace. Sincere like a salesman. "I have heard about your situation, Reverend. Perhaps this is a season for reflection." He put his hand on my shoulder. I wanted to shrug it off. A season. To consider the choices that brought you here. Sometimes hardship is God's way of teaching humility. I looked at him. Clean collar. Warm coat. Hot coffee. Still steaming in his other hand. "I examine my choices every night, Reverend. I examine them plenty." I walked away before he could offer another lesson I had not asked for. That evening, day 4, I made a mistake. I was tired. Bone tired. The kind of exhaustion that turns off the part of your brain that protects you from yourself. I took the short route back to the harbor, the one that passes Dylan's house. I did not mean to stop. Did not mean to look. But the lights were on. Warm yellow light in every window. Smoke curling from the chimney. The harbor glittering behind the house. My house. The Calloway house that I had sold to save him. Movement inside. A shadow crossing the living room. Dylan. He turned toward the window, and our eyes met through the glass. For 1 second, I thought he might come out. Might say something. Might remember what he had done and feel it. His face went hard. He reached up and pulled the curtain closed. The same gesture as that first night. Deliberate. Final. Another window. Vanessa appeared. She looked right at me, standing there in the street in my worn coat, salt in my hair, nothing left of the man I used to be. She smiled. Not a warm smile. The smile of someone who had gotten exactly what she wanted. Then she turned away, laughing, mouth moving, saying something to Dylan. About me, probably. About the old man haunting the street like a ghost who did not know he was dead. My legs moved. Got me away. I do not remember the walk back. Do not remember opening the boxcar door or climbing inside. But I remember sitting on the floor. I remember Nep coming over, whining, licking my face like he was trying to fix something that could not be fixed. I put my arms around him and I cried. First time since that door closed. First time since I became this thing people crossed the street to avoid. I cried until my chest hurt, until my throat was raw, until there was nothing left in me but salt and silence. Nep held still. Let me hold him. Did not judge, did not pull away, did not decide I was too much trouble. Good dog. Best dog. When I finally stopped, when the shaking passed and the silence settled back in, I sat with my back against the cold wall and I listened. Through the steel, the ocean was there. Still moving, still crashing, still alive, rock bottom. That is what this was. The place you fall to when your own son closes the curtain on your face and strangers will not give you a chance. And a preacher tells you it is your fault for not being humble enough. But here is the thing about rock bottom. When you hit it by the ocean, you can still hear the waves. And waves do not stop. They keep coming, keep crashing, keep reshaping the shore one grain at a time. They do not care about your pain. They do not care about your shame. They just keep moving. I looked at Nep, at the boxcar around me, at the work I had done with nothing. Tomorrow, I whispered. Something has to change tomorrow. I lay down. Nep curled against me. Through the steel walls, the waves kept their rhythm. I closed my eyes and listened and waited for morning. It came at 6 with a knock. Gentle, patient. 2 soft raps. The opposite of everything I had heard for 4 days. Nep did not growl. His tail moved. Whoever was on the other side of that door, my dog trusted them. I opened it to gray morning light and 2 faces I had not expected. One I half recognized. A woman from a shop I had passed but never entered. The other was a stranger. An older man with white hair and kind eyes, and a worn suit that had seen better decades. Mr. Calloway? The woman's voice was warm, steady. My name is Mabel Torres, and this is someone I think you need to meet. The first $10 I ever earned in Gloucester came from Mabel Torres, and she made sure I knew it was not charity. It was a Tuesday morning. 9 days after Jim Prescott had given me the ultimatum. 9 days of patching walls, melting snow, and rationing granola bars split between me and a yellow dog who trusted me more than any human being on earth. My rent was due in 48 hours, and I had exactly $0 to my name. I had walked into Mabel's general store on Harbor Loop because Neptune needed food. Not the scraps I had been pulling from trash bins behind the fish market. Real food. The kind that would put weight back on his ribs and stop them from showing through his fur like piano keys. Mabel was behind the counter, reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose, sorting through a pile of invoices that looked like they had been breeding overnight. She glanced up when the bell rang and gave me that look. The one the whole town had been perfecting since I showed up. Somewhere between pity and suspicion. Mr. Calloway. She said it flat. Not unfriendly, but not warm either. Morning, Mabel. I was wondering if you had any work. Shelves that need stocking. Deliveries. Anything. She looked at me over those glasses for a long time. Then, she looked at the invoices. Then, back at me. You know numbers? I was a maritime engineer for 40 years. I know numbers. She pushed the pile across the counter. Weekly inventory. Every Tuesday. Count what is on the shelves. Match it to what is on the invoices. Tell me what is missing. $10 a week. $10. Not enough for rent on its own. But it was a start. And more importantly, it was dignity. I took the invoices and got to work. It took me 3 hours to go through every shelf in that store. Canned goods, dry goods, cleaning supplies, fishing tackle, batteries, bread, milk, and 47 other categories that Mabel had organized in a system that made sense only to her. By the time I finished, I had found 16 discrepancies, 2 expired shipments she had been charged for, and a billing error from her distributor that was costing her $11 every single month. When I showed her the numbers, she took off her glasses and stared at the paper like I had handed her a treasure map. $11 a month, she repeated, for at least 6 months. Based on the invoice dates, that is $66 they owe you. She picked up the phone and called her distributor right there. I heard her voice shift from the flat Gloucester tone to something sharper, something with teeth. When she hung up, she looked at me differently. The suspicion was gone. Same time next Tuesday, Mr. Calloway. I walked out of that store with $10 in my pocket and something worth more. A reason to come back. The next job came 2 days later, and it came because of the cold. Theodore Walsh lived in a yellow Victorian on Prospect Street. The kind of house that looked beautiful in postcards and leaked heat like a screen door on a submarine. His furnace had been making a sound he described as a dying whale trying to sing opera, and the repair company in Rockport wanted $200 just to look at it. I knocked on his door because I had heard him complaining about it at Mabel's store. He opened it wearing 3 sweaters, and a look of deep personal betrayal directed at the universe in general. I hear your furnace is giving you trouble, I said. Trouble is what my ex-wife gave me. This furnace is giving me hypothermia. I asked if I could take a look. He let me in, mostly because he was too cold to argue. The furnace was a 1986 Carrier Weathermaker, and the problem was immediately obvious to anyone who had spent decades maintaining heating systems in lighthouses along the North Atlantic. The igniter was cracked. The filter had not been changed since the Clinton administration, and the blower motor bearings were screaming for oil. I fixed the igniter with a piece I had salvaged from the rail yard, replaced the filter with one Theodore had in his basement and did not know about, oiled the bearings. The whole job took 90 minutes. When the furnace kicked back on and warm air started pouring through the vents, Theodore stood in front of the register with his arms spread wide, like a man receiving a blessing from above. "How much?" he asked. "Whatever you think is fair." He handed me $15 and a plate of leftover pot roast that his neighbor had brought over. I tried to refuse the food. He would not hear it. "You just saved me $200 and possibly my life." "Take the pot roast, Frank." I took the pot roast. Neptune and I ate like kings that night, sitting in our boxcar while the wind howled outside, and the cast-iron pot sat on the fire pit I had built from harbor stones. $15 from Theodore, 10 from Mabel, $25 in 1 week. Rent was 10. That left 15 for supplies. For the first time since Dylan shut that door, I did the math, and the numbers did not make me sick. That Friday, I paid Jim Prescott his first $10 in rent. He counted it slowly, like he expected the bills to vanish. Then he folded them into his shirt pocket and nodded. "You are something else, Calloway." "I am an engineer, Jim. We solve problems." He almost smiled. Almost. Then he looked past me toward the water, where Cape Ann Light stood dark against the evening sky. "You know," he said quietly, "the Coast Guard has been trying to figure out what to do with that lighthouse for 2 years. Decommissioned. No budget to maintain it. No buyer either. It just sits there, rotting." I followed his gaze. The lighthouse was maybe 300 yards from my boxcar, perched on the granite outcrop where the harbor met the open Atlantic. Third order, Fresnel lens. Built in 1861. I had supervised its decommissioning myself in 2019. Walked through every room, cataloged every crack, turned off the light for the last time. It had felt like turning off a life support machine. "Somebody should take care of it," I said. "Somebody should." Jim looked at me. "But nobody will." He walked away, boots crunching on the frozen gravel. Neptune pressed his nose against my leg. I stood there watching the lighthouse until the last light bled out of the sky and the dark tower became a shadow against the stars. That night I lay in the boxcar, with Neptune curled against my side and the fire pit glowing orange through the darkness. I could not stop thinking about it. The lighthouse. Dark for 2 years. A structure built to save lives, abandoned because nobody could find a use for it anymore. I knew that feeling. I also knew something else. I knew every beam, every bolt, every inch of that lighthouse. I knew what it needed, and for the first time since I had been thrown out into the cold, I felt something dangerous stirring in my chest. Hope, not the small kind, not the kind that gets you through the night. The kind that makes you believe you could do something impossible. The kind that got my grandfather to drag stones from the harbor to build a house. The kind that makes an engineer look at a broken thing and see what it could become. I reached for my notebook and opened to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote 2 words, Cape Ann. Below that, I started drawing. I woke before dawn with a blueprint in my head and salt air in my lungs. Neptune was sitting at the boxcar door, nose pressed against the gap where cold wind whistled through. He looked back at me with those brown eyes that said the same thing every morning. "We going somewhere today, old man?" "Yeah, Nep. We are going somewhere today." I pulled on my coat, grabbed my notebook, and stepped into a morning so clear the sky looked like it had been scrubbed with steel wool. The harbor was glass. Fishing boats sat motionless on water that reflected the pink edge of sunrise. And there, 300 yards across the granite outcrop, Cape Ann Light stood against the sky like a patient old man waiting for someone to remember he existed. I had not set foot inside that lighthouse since I turned off the light in 2019. Walked out, locked the door, handed the key to a Coast Guard lieutenant, who looked like he had already forgotten about it. That was the last lighthouse I ever decommissioned. After 40 years of keeping lights burning along the Atlantic, I turned off the final one and drove home to a wife who was already sick and a son who was already lost. Now I stood at the iron door with my notebook and a rusted crowbar from the rail yard. The padlock was Coast Guard standard, but 2 years of salt air had done the work for me. 3 hits, and the shackle snapped. The smell hit me first. Damp stone, rust, bird droppings, and underneath it all, the ghost of kerosene that never fully leaves a lighthouse. Neptune hesitated at the threshold, then followed me in, claws clicking on stone like a telegraph. Ground level. The old storage room. 12 by 12 feet, circular walls, stone foundation 3 feet thick. I ran my hand along the mortar, crumbling in places but structurally sound. The iron spiral staircase held firm under my full weight. Good bones. 37 steps to the watchroom. Windows on 4 sides, most cracked, 2 shattered. Bird nests in the corners. A wooden table against the north wall, swollen with moisture, but intact. 14 more steps to the lantern room. The Fresnel lens was gone, shipped to a museum in Portland during decommissioning. What remained was the iron framework, the ventilation dome, and a 360-degree view of the Atlantic that caught my breath, the same way it did when I first stood in a lighthouse at 19. I opened my notebook and wrote numbers. Foundation walls, 3 feet of granite. Thermal mass sufficient. Heat retention, excellent if gap sealed. Usable floor space across 3 levels, approximately 420 square feet. Windows needing replacement 6. Salvageable 2. Staircase structurally sound, needs rust treatment. Roof intact, but leaking at 3 seams. Repair cost at market rates $12,000 to $15,000. Repair cost using salvaged materials and my own labor somewhere between nothing and hope. 4 hours inside. Every wall measured. Every joint checked. 11 pages filled. Neptune followed room to room, barking at pigeons who had claimed the lantern room as their kingdom. By noon I had a plan. The boxcar was survival. But the lighthouse could be something more. A place to live. A place to matter. I was sitting on the rocks eating the last of Theodore's pot roast when a voice came from behind me. You know that is government property. A woman stood on the path above, arms crossed, wind pulling at gray hair. Maybe 60, with a face that looked like it had been arguing with the ocean for decades and winning. Heavy canvas jacket, with the Gloucester Historical Society patch on the shoulder. I am aware, I said. Breaking in is a federal offense. The padlock was already compromised by corrosion. I simply completed the process. She stared at me. Then the corner of her mouth lifted. You are the boxcar man, Frank Calloway. Ruth Pemberton. Historical Society. She came down the rocks with sure footing. I have been trying to get the Coast Guard to do something about this lighthouse for 2 years. Letters. Calls. Petitions. They do not have the budget and they do not care. I care, I said. Why? Because I turned off the light. And I have been thinking about that ever since. Ruth sat down beside me. Neptune put his head on her knee. She scratched behind his ear without looking, like it was the most natural thing in the world. What are you planning, Mr. Calloway? I handed her my notebook. She turned pages slowly. The measurements, the material lists, the diagrams of insulation and window framing and the ventilation system I had designed, using principles from maintaining lights, from main to the outer banks. You want to restore it, she said. I want to bring it back. She closed the notebook and looked at the lighthouse. Morning light caught the white paint, peeling but bright in places. The Historical Society has a small preservation fund. Very small. But I might get you designated as a volunteer caretaker. Legal access. Protection from trespassing charges. What would I need to do? Keep it standing. File quarterly reports. She paused. And do not burn it down. I have kept lights burning for 40 years, Ruth. I am not about to start burning them down. She handed my notebook back. Give me a week. She climbed the rocks and disappeared along the harbor path. Neptune watched her go, tail wagging for the first time since I found him under the wharf. I know, boy. I like her too. That evening I sat in the boxcar with the fire pit crackling and my notebook open to a floor plan. Ground level converted to living quarters. Workbench along the east wall. Sleeping area in the alcove where oil tanks once sat. A wood stove vented through the existing chimney flue. It would take weeks, maybe months. Materials I did not have. Tools I would need to borrow or build. Permissions that might never come. But I had a project. A purpose. A light to bring back. Neptune curled against my feet. The ocean drummed its rhythm on the rocks. Somewhere in the dark, Cape Ann light waited. Patient. Ready. Like it had been waiting for me. All along. I turned to a fresh page and wrote one line. Day 1. The light comes back. Ruth Pemberton kept her word. 7 days after she climbed down those rocks, she called Mabel's store and left a message for me. Volunteer caretaker status approved. I had legal access to Cape Ann light. Effective, immediately. I stood in Mabel's store holding that slip of paper and read it 3 times. Neptune sat at my feet, looking up like he understood every word. Mabel watched me from behind the counter, with her arms crossed. You are going to fix that lighthouse, she said. Not a question. I am going to try. You are living in a boxcar, Frank. You have $25 a week, and you want to restore a 160-year-old lighthouse. When you put it like that, it sounds unreasonable. It is unreasonable. Then it should feel right at home with the rest of my life. She did not laugh. But she opened the back room and came out with a canvas tool belt that looked like it had survived 2 world wars. Inside were a claw hammer, a set of flathead screwdrivers, a tape measure, and a pair of pliers, with electrical tape wrapped around one handle. These were my husband's. He has been dead 11 years. They have been sitting in that room collecting dust. She set them on the counter. Do not lose them. I took that tool belt and wore it every single day for the next 6 weeks. The first week was demolition. I cleared the ground level of everything that had rotted beyond saving. Old wooden crates that crumbled when I touched them. Rusted oil drums leaking brown water onto the stone floor. Pigeon nests thick enough to fill a wheelbarrow. I hauled everything out by hand. Load after load. Stacking it on the rocks outside where the tide would carry the organic waste, and I could sort the metal for reuse. Neptune supervised from the doorway. Every time I passed him carrying another armload of debris, his tail thumped once against the stone. Encouragement. On a budget. The second week I sealed the walls. The mortar between the granite blocks had crumbled in dozens of places, letting wind and moisture push through. I made my own patching compound from a mixture I had used on lighthouse walls, from Penobscot Bay to Cape Hatteras. Dotted, Edeite, Portland cement, fine sand from the harbor beach, and salt water mixed to the consistency of thick oatmeal. Not elegant, but waterproof and strong enough to outlast me. I worked from bottom to top, pressing the mixture into every gap with a flat piece of driftwood I had shaped into a trowel. My shoulders burned. My knees ached on the cold stone, but every gap I sealed was one less place the wind could reach, and I could feel the difference by the end of each day. The ground level was holding heat. Theodore Walsh showed up on day 10 with a truck bed full of scrap lumber. Tore down my back porch last summer, he said, dropping the tailgate. Been meaning to take it to the dump. But if you can use it, save me the trip. I could use it. Every board. I sorted the lumber by length and condition, set aside the pieces with rot or splits, and stacked the rest inside the lighthouse. Framing material for interior walls. Shelving. A sleeping platform raised off the cold stone floor. Theodore watched me work for a while. Hands in his pockets. Breath clouding in the morning air. You really think you can make this place livable? I made a boxcar livable. Faire point. He came back the next day with a box of nails and a sack of potatoes. The day after that, he brought his neighbor, a retired plumber named George Haddad, who looked at my pipe situation and shook his head slowly the way plumbers do when they are calculating how much disappointment they are about to deliver. "No running water," George said. "I know. No sewage connection. I know. The nearest water main is 400 feet uphill. I know that too." George looked at me. "You want me to help anyway. I would be grateful." He sighed the sigh of a man who had been retired just long enough to miss having problems to solve. "Let me see what I can scrounge." By week 3, the ground level was transforming. I had framed a sleeping alcove in the southeast curve of the wall, raised 18 inches off the floor on a platform of Theodore's porch lumber, insulated the walls with layers of newspaper, canvas, and burlap. The same technique I had used in the boxcar, but applied with more precision. Built a workbench along the east wall from 2 sawhorses and a solid oak plank I had pulled from a demolished fishing shack near the pier. George came through with 50 feet of copper pipe, salvaged from a bathroom renovation on Main Street. We ran a gravity-fed line from a rain collection barrel I mounted on the rocks above the lighthouse, down through a gap in the wall to a makeshift sink basin. Cold water only, no pressure to speak of. But it was water, inside, without carrying buckets. The wood stove was my masterpiece. I built it from a 50-gallon steel drum I had cut and welded, using a borrowed torch from the boat repair shop. Lined the interior with firebrick salvaged from a demolished chimney on Prospect Street. Vented it through the existing flue that had once carried kerosene fumes from the original lamp system. The draft was perfect. 40 years of understanding how air moves through lighthouse ventilation systems, and it all came down to this one stove in this one room. The first night I lit that stove, the ground level reached 58 degrees within an hour. Outside it was 11. I sat on my sleeping platform with Neptune beside me, and felt warmth that I had built with my own hands surround me like something I had almost forgotten. Not comfort. Not yet. But the promise of it. Week 4. Week 5. The work continued. I replaced the 2 salvageable windows with glass panes, Ruth sourced from the Historical Society's storage. Patched the other 4 with heavy plastic sheeting and wooden frames. Treated the iron staircase with a rust converter I mixed from vinegar and molasses. An old maritime trick that smelled terrible but worked. Swept the watchroom clean and set up the swollen table as a planning desk. People noticed. Fishermen passing the outcrop would stop and watch. Some waved, some did not. Mabel started leaving a bag of day-old bread by her back door on Tuesday mornings without saying a word about it. Theodore brought coffee in a thermos twice a week. George kept finding pipe. And every evening, I climbed the 51 steps to the lantern room and stood where the Fresnel lens used to be. The iron framework was still there, waiting for something to fill it. The 360-degree view of the Atlantic stretched in every direction. Dark water meeting dark sky. No light yet. But the structure was sound. The keeper was home. On the morning of week 6, I was on the rocks mixing mortar when Neptune's ears went flat. He stood rigid, staring down the harbor path. I followed his gaze and saw 2 figures approaching. One was Jim Prescott in his harbor master jacket. The other was a younger man in a dark overcoat, carrying a leather briefcase. Jim's face told me everything I needed to know. Whatever was coming, he had not been able to stop it. "Frank," Jim said quietly, "this is Mr. Whitfield. He is from the Coast Guard's property division." The man in the overcoat did not offer his hand. He looked at the lighthouse, then at me, then at his briefcase like it contained something unpleasant he was required to deliver. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "we need to discuss your occupancy of this structure." Neptune growled low. I put my hand on his head. "Easy, boy. Let me handle this." Mr. Whitfield opened his briefcase on the flat rock beside the lighthouse door like a surgeon laying out instruments. Inside were folders, each one tabbed and color-coded, with the kind of precision that made my engineering brain appreciate the organization while my gut told me this man had come to take something from me. Mr. Calloway, I will be direct. He pulled out a document and held it against the wind. Cape Ann Light is federal property under the jurisdiction of the United States Coast Guard. Your volunteer caretaker designation was issued by a local historical society that has no legal authority to grant occupancy rights. I looked at Jim. He was staring at the ground. Ruth Pemberton filed the paperwork, I said. Mrs. Pemberton filed a request. It was never approved at the federal level. What you have is a letter from a county historical society. What you do not have is permission from the United States government to live inside, modify, or otherwise occupy this structure. Neptune was pressed against my leg, his body tense, ears flat. Dogs understand tone better than most people. And Whitfield's tone said, eviction. I have not damaged this lighthouse, I said carefully. I have improved it. The mortar was failing. The windows were shattered. The interior was filled with rot and debris. Everything I have done has preserved the structural integrity of a 165-year-old building that your agency abandoned. Abandoned is not the word we use. What word do you use? Decommissioned. I know what decommissioned means, Mr. Whitfield. I am the man who decommissioned it. That stopped him. He looked at me. Really looked. For the first time since he arrived, you were the engineer on the 2019 project? 40 years with the Coast Guard Aids to Navigation program. I maintained, repaired, and decommissioned lighthouses from Penobscot Bay to Cape Hatteras. Cape Ann was my last assignment. I turned off the light myself. Whitfield closed the folder slowly. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not sympathy exactly. More like the recalculation that happens when a bureaucrat realizes the person across from him knows the system as well as he does. That does not change the legal situation, he said. But his voice had dropped half a register. Jim Prescott finally spoke. Mr. Whitfield, I have been harbor master here for 14 years. That lighthouse has been falling apart since the day the Coast Guard walked away. Frank Calloway is the only person who has lifted a finger to keep it standing. If you shut him out, it will be rubble within 5 years. That is not my decision. Whose decision is it? I asked. Whitfield looked at the lighthouse. The morning sun was catching the freshly sealed walls, the new window frames, the clean stone where I had scrubbed away 2 years of grime and neglect. Even he could see the difference. There is a process, he said. The National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act. Under certain conditions, decommissioned lighthouses can be transferred to local government, nonprofit organizations, or qualified individuals for preservation purposes. I know the act, I said. Section 208. Then you know it requires a formal application, a preservation plan, environmental review, and approval from the regional command. How long? 6 months. Minimum. More likely 9 to 12. My stomach dropped. A year. I did not have a year. I barely had a month. And during that time? I asked. During that time, technically, you should not be here. The wind picked up. It came off the Atlantic cold and sharp, carrying the smell of deep water and the sound of waves hitting granite. Neptune whined softly. Whitfield put the folders back into his briefcase. Slowly, like he was buying himself time to think. When he closed the latch, he stood there for a long moment, looking at the lighthouse. I will tell you what I am going to do, Mr. Calloway. I am going to file my inspection report. In that report, I am going to note that the structure shows signs of recent unauthorized maintenance. I am also going to note that said maintenance has materially improved the condition of the property and that removal of the current occupant would likely result in accelerated deterioration. He paused. I am then going to recommend a 90-day provisional occupancy period while a formal application under the Preservation Act is processed. That recommendation will go to my regional supervisor, who will either approve it or deny it. I expect an answer within 2 weeks. And if he denies it, then you will have 30 days to vacate. And everything you have built here stays behind as government property. He extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was firm, but not hostile. "For what it is worth," he said quietly, "I have seen what happens to these lighthouses when no one cares. You are doing good work here." He glanced at Jim. "Both of you." He walked up the path without looking back. His dark overcoat disappeared around the bend. And then it was just me and Jim and Neptune, standing on the rocks with the wind and the weight of what had just happened. Jim let out a breath he had been holding for 10 minutes. 90 days, he said. If his supervisor approves, he will approve. Whitfield did not drive 4 hours from Boston to shut down one old man in a lighthouse. He came because somebody filed a complaint, and he needed to put something on paper. He just put the best something he could. Who filed the complaint? Jim did not answer right away. He looked out at the harbor, at the boats rocking gently on water that had turned from glass to slate as clouds rolled in from the east. "I do not know for certain," he said, "but Mabel told me someone called the Coast Guard tip line last week." Young voice. Male. Asked specifically about Cape Ann Light and whether anyone had authorization to be there. The cold that went through me had nothing to do with the wind. Dylan. I had not spoken to my son in almost 2 months. Had not called. Had not written. I told myself it was pride. But it was something closer to survival. Every time I thought about him, I felt the floor tilt under me the way a deck tilts in heavy seas. So I stopped thinking about him. Or tried to. But he had not stopped thinking about me. Not out of love. Out of something else. Something I did not want to name yet because naming it would make it real, and I was not ready for that weight on top of everything else I was carrying. Jim put his hand on my shoulder. "One thing at a time, Frank." "One thing at a time," I repeated. He walked back toward the harbor. I stood on the rocks with Neptune and watched the clouds build over the Atlantic. They were dark, heavy, moving fast. I had 90 days. Maybe. And somewhere out there, my son was trying to pull the ground out from under me for the second time. I looked up at Cape Ann Light. The white walls I had sealed. The windows I had framed. The iron door I had oiled until it swung smooth and silent. My work. My hands. My purpose. "They are not taking you," I said to the lighthouse. "And they are not taking me." Neptune barked once. Sharp and sure. Like an amen. I picked up my trowel and went back to work. 2 weeks passed. Whitfield's supervisor approved the 90-day provisional occupancy. Ruth Hand delivered the letter to Mabel's store on a Tuesday morning. I read it, standing between the canned goods and the fishing tackle with my hands shaking so badly. Neptune pressed his nose against my palm to steady me. 90 days. Federal letterhead. My name typed in a box that said, "Authorized occupant." I had not seen my name on anything official since Margaret's death certificate. That one nearly broke me. This one put something back together. "Do not celebrate yet," Ruth said. "The formal application still needs to go through. This just means they will not drag you out while it processes." She lowered her voice. The complaint that triggered Whitfield's visit came from a prepaid phone. No name, but the caller knew your full name. The decommission date. The caretaker request. "My son," I said. "If he files a formal objection during the application, it could delay approval past the 90 days. Which means you are out before the transfer goes through." I folded the letter and put it in my coat pocket next to my notebook. 2 things I carried everywhere. The plan and the permission. Both fragile. That evening I sat in the lighthouse ground level with the wood stove glowing. The space had transformed over 6 weeks. Sealed walls. Framed sleeping alcove. Workbench with tools on driftwood pegs. Rain barrel water trickling through copper pipe into the stone basin. It smelled like cedar shavings and wood smoke and salt air. It sounded like the ocean breathing against the rocks below. I opened my notebook to the expense page. $10 a week from Mabel. 15 every 2 weeks from Theodore. Small jobs here and there. Fixing a dock cleat. For a fisherman named Sal. Rewiring a porch light for the bed and breakfast on Eastern Point. Total savings after 6 weeks came to $63. Total expenses: rent, food, kerosene, supplies, came to 51. That left $12 between me and nothing. $12. In my old life, that was a sandwich. In this life, it was the margin between surviving and not. I started working on the Preservation Act application. 27 pages of federal bureaucracy. Preservation plan, structural assessment, financial viability statement, environmental review, historical significance documentation. Most of it I could handle. The structural assessment was already in my notebook. The historical significance was on the National Register. The preservation plan I could write in my sleep, but financial viability. The government wanted to know how I planned to maintain a 165-year-old lighthouse on $12 and odd jobs. I put the pen down and looked at Neptune. "I need a real job, Nep." He put his head back down. Even the dog knew that was easier said than done. The next morning I walked into town. Hardware store, boat repair shop, fish market, 2 winter restaurants. I offered everything: engineering, electrical, plumbing, carpentry. 40 years of keeping complex systems running in the worst conditions the Atlantic could produce. The hardware store owner looked at me like I had offered to teach his cat to read. The fish market had a maintenance man. The restaurants did not need anyone until tourist season in May. 3 months away. I was standing on the sidewalk outside the Crow's Nest Tavern, running out of options, when a voice called from across the street. Mr. Calloway. A man I had never seen. Tall, maybe 50, salt and pepper beard, heavy wool coat that looked expensive, but worn in the way expensive things get when the owner actually uses them. Patrick Donnelly. I owned the Donnelly Boatyard on Rocky Neck. I knew the boatyard. 3 generations of Donnellys building and repairing fishing vessels, pleasure boats, and the occasional yacht for Boston money looking for authenticity. "I hear you are the man fixing the lighthouse," he said. "Also, the man who fixed Theodore Walsh's furnace with scrap metal and 40 years of experience. Word travels. In Gloucester, word travels faster than gossip." He pulled out a business card. "I need a marine systems engineer. Diesel, hydraulics, electrical, hull maintenance, full-time through winter. $16 an hour. 40 hours a week." I did the math before he finished. 640 a week. 2,560 a month. Rent, supplies, the application, and something I had not dared think about: a future. "When do I start?" "Monday. 6 in the morning. Bring your own tools." He looked at the canvas belt on my waist. "Looks like you already have that covered." He shook my hand and walked away. I stood on the sidewalk with Neptune at my feet and the card in my hand, and hope pressing against my chest so hard I could barely breathe. That night I climbed the 51 steps to the lantern room. The Atlantic was black and endless. Stars so bright they looked wet. No moon. Just darkness and the sound of water that never stops. I thought about calling Dylan. I had the number memorized. Could have walked to the payphone outside Mabel's store. Could have said, "I am okay. I have a job. I am rebuilding a lighthouse. I am not dead weight." I did not call. Not because I did not want to. Because I was afraid of what I might hear. Silence. Vanessa's voice, saying Dylan was unavailable. Or Dylan saying something that would break the fragile thing I had spent 6 weeks building inside myself. Some structures are not ready for testing. You have to let the mortar cure. I looked at the dark water and made a decision. File the application. Start the job at Donnelly's. Keep building. And when the time was right, when I was strong enough, deal with my son. But tonight, standing in the lantern room of a lighthouse I was bringing back to life, I let myself feel something I had been rationing more carefully than food or kerosene. Pride, not the kind that comes before a fall, the kind that comes after you have already fallen and gotten back up. The quiet kind that does not need anyone else to see it. Neptune barked from below. Dinner time. I took one last look at the stars and headed down the spiral stairs, boots ringing on iron, hands steady on the rail. Monday morning. Donnelly Boatyard. 6 o'clock sharp. I was ready. I worked at Donnelly Boatyard for 3 weeks before the ocean reminded us who was in charge. Patrick had me on a 42-foot trawler called the Mary Christine, replacing corroded fuel lines and rebuilding the hydraulic winch system. My hands remembered what to do even when my mind wandered. $16 an hour changed everything. I paid Jim 2 weeks' rent in advance. Bought proper dog food for Neptune. Picked up a wool blanket from the thrift store for $2. Replaced the cracked kerosene lamp with a hurricane lantern. Small purchases. Each one felt enormous. At the lighthouse, progress continued before and after work. I woke at 4:30 every morning, walked to Cape Ann Light in the dark, and worked until 5:30. Then the mile, walked to Donnelly's. After my shift, I came back and worked until I could not see my hands. Neptune learned the schedule by the second week. 4:25. Waiting at the door, tail going. Ruth filed the Preservation Act application on my behalf. 27 pages. I wrote the structural assessment and preservation plan. She handled the legal language. George contributed a plumbing report. Theodore wrote a letter of community support. Mabel signed it. So did 14 other people I barely knew. Fishermen, shopkeepers, the woman whose porch light I had fixed for $5. The application went to Boston on a Wednesday. 6 to 8 weeks for a response. I had 53 days left on provisional occupancy. The math was tight. I was elbow deep in the Mary Christine's engine on a Thursday afternoon when Patrick's daughter Emma came running down the dock. 12 years old, red-haired, loud in the way children are before the world teaches them quiet. "Mr. Calloway, there is a man at the office asking about you." Through the window I saw him. Young, dark hair, expensive jacket that did not belong in a working boatyard. Dylan. My feet stopped moving. Neptune lifted his head from his spot by the propane heater and growled. Low. Steady. I pushed through the door. He turned. Thinner than I remembered. Dark circles under his eyes. The confidence Vanessa had polished onto him was cracking at the edges. Dad. Dylan. 5 feet apart. The distance felt like the Atlantic. Patrick appeared from the back room. Read the situation in 2 seconds. "Take the break room, Frank. Take as long as you need." The break room was plywood walls, a coffee maker, and 2 plastic chairs. I sat in one. Dylan sat in the other. Neptune positioned himself between us, facing my son, ears flat. "You look good," Dylan said. "I look 65 and tired." "Say what you came to say." His hands were shaking. I noticed that. I wished I had not. Vanessa left. 3 weeks ago. Took the car, half the furniture, and the savings account. He paused. "I am behind on the mortgage. 2 months. The bank sent a letter." Another pause. "I came because I need help." There it was. Same sentence. Different year. "I need help." The words that had cost me my house, my savings, and 8 months of my life. "You called the Coast Guard," I said quietly. His face went white. Not the white of surprise. The white of being caught. I was angry. "Vanessa said you were making me look bad. Living in a lighthouse. Getting in the newspaper. She said people were judging me. People judged you because you threw your father into a blizzard, Dylan. Not because I survived it." He flinched. "Some truth should sting. I need money, Dad." "No. The bank is going to Grymanite." "No. I said it the way you close a watertight door. Final. Sealed. I sold my home for you. Gave you $350,000. Slept in a boxcar. Ate from trash cans. Rebuilt my life with borrowed tools and $12 in savings. And you called the Coast Guard to take the one thing I built from nothing." Dylan's eyes were wet. I wanted that to move me. Part of it did. The part that remembered him at 5 years old in the bow of my skiff, trusting me to keep us steady. But the other part, the part that had spent 2 months patching walls and curing mortar and learning to stand on my own, that part held firm. I am not giving you money, but I will say what your mother would have said if she were here. You are 32 years old. You have 2 hands and a brain that works when you let it. Stop waiting for someone to rescue you and rescue yourself. How? One day at a time. One problem at a time. One nail at a time. The coffee maker dripped. Neptune's growl faded to a low rumble like distant thunder, deciding whether to come closer. I do not know how to do that, Dylan said. Then learn. I stood up. My knees cracked. I looked at my son and saw 2 people at once. The boy who grabbed my hand on the dock and the man who shut the door in my face. Both real. Both mine. There is a motel on Route 128. $30 a night. Tomorrow morning, if you want, come to the boatyard at 6. Patrick needs dock labor. 12 an hour. Hard work. Cold. Your hands will bleed the first week. You would do that for me? I am not doing anything for you. I am telling you where the door is. You have to walk through it yourself. I left the break room. Neptune followed. Behind me, I heard Dylan exhale. The long, shaking breath of a man who has run out of everyone to blame, except himself. That night, I sat in the lantern room and watched a weather system build on the horizon. Dark clouds stacking like bricks. The barometer reading in my notebook showed pressure dropping fast. My bad knee confirmed it. Something was coming. Something big. The harbor was already responding. Fishing boats pulling in early. Lobster traps stacked double on the docks. A line out the door at Mabel's store. People buying batteries and canned goods and bottled water. 40 years on the Atlantic teaches you to read the sky the way other people read books. And this sky was writing a story I had read only twice in my career. A nor'easter. Not the ordinary kind that blows through and moves on. The kind that settles in and stays. The kind that earns a name. I calculated in my notebook. Wind speed estimates. Storm surge potential. Temperature drop projections. The lighthouse could handle it. 3 feet of granite. Solid stove. Sealed windows. But the boxcar on those tracks 300 yards away, that thin steel shell would not survive what was coming. And anyone caught outside when this storm hit would not survive either. I closed the notebook and looked at Neptune. He was staring at the horizon, ears forward, nostrils flaring. He could smell it too. We are going to need more firewood, boy. The storm hit Gloucester at 3:17 in the morning on a Saturday. I know the exact time because the wind woke me. And when wind wakes a man who spent 40 years sleeping through gales on lighthouse catwalks, that wind means business. I had spent 2 days preparing. Stacked firewood inside the lighthouse until the ground level looked like a lumberyard. Filled every container with fresh water. Moved my supplies from the boxcar because that steel shell would not hold. Sealed the windows with extra plastic and nailed cross braces over the 2 that still had glass. Checked the stove flue 3 times. Calculated heat retention for a 72-hour storm at 60 to 80 mile-per-hour winds and temperatures dropping to -15. The math said the lighthouse would hold. In 40 years, the math had never lied to me. Neptune knew before I did. Pacing since midnight, whining at the door, circling back to press against my legs. Dogs feel pressure, drops in ways we pretend to understand. When the wind shifted from its usual moan to something deeper, something with weight, I got up and lit the stove. By 4 in the morning, the world outside had disappeared. Snow moved sideways so thick, you could not see the ocean 20 feet below. The wind was not howling. It was roaring. A sustained, furious sound pressing against granite walls like a giant leaning on the building to see if it would move. 1861 granite does not move. I was boiling water when the first knock came. Not a knock, a pounding. The kind of sound a fist makes when the person behind it is not sure they have strength for a second try. I opened the door, and the storm tried to come in. Behind the white, two figures. A woman holding a child against her chest, both covered in snow so thick they looked like statues that had learned to walk. Please. One word. Carrying the weight of everything. I pulled them inside. The woman collapsed on the floor. The child, a girl, maybe 7, was silent. Not crying, not shaking, just silent. Which is worse. How long outside? I asked. 20 minutes. Maybe more. Our car went off Harbor Road. The heater stopped. I saw the light. The light. I had left the hurricane lantern burning in the watchroom window. 40 years of lighthouse keeping. You always leave a light burning. I wrapped them in the wool blanket and spare coat. Moved them near the stove. Neptune went straight to the girl and lay beside her, pressing his warm body against hers. She put her hand on his fur and made a small sigh, like air leaking from something sealed too tight. "Catherine Bell," the woman said. "This is my daughter Lily." The second knock came at 5:30. A fisherman named Dominic, soaked to the bone, lips blue, caught by storm surge while securing his boat. The third at 6:15. Martin and June Hathaway from the cottage on Eastern Point. Their roof had collapsed under snow. Martin had a cut on his forehead, bleeding freely. June held his arm, whispering prayers I could barely hear over the wind. By 8 in the morning, 9 people. They came in ones and twos, drawn by the lantern or guided by someone already inside who shouted directions into the storm before I pulled them through the door. 16 people in a circular room 12 feet across. 7 square feet per person. Less than a prison cell, more than a coffin. I was determined to keep everyone closer to the first number. I organized. That is what engineers do. We turn chaos into systems, sleeping areas along the curved wall by medical need. Martin closest to the stove for his wound and age. Catherine and Lily beside him for the child's warmth. Able-bodied men along the far wall where the draft was worst because they could take it. Water rationing. Enough stored for 3 days at 2-cup portions every 4 hours. Warm only. Cold water drops core temperature, and I was not losing anyone to something that preventable. Firewood. Burn rate against supply. Maintaining 55 degrees, I had fuel for 4 days. The radio forecast before it died said 3 to 5 days. Tight. Food was the thinnest margin. Canned beans, rice, dried fish, and whatever people carried. Catherine had 3 granola bars. Dominic had half a sandwich. June had hard candies for her grandchildren. I pooled everything into meal portions. 2 meals a day. Small. Enough to keep bodies working. Nobody complained. When wind sounds like it is peeling the world apart, nobody argues about portions. Martin's wound needed closing. I cleaned it with boiled water, made butterfly strips from surgical tape, and checked his pupils every 2 hours for concussion. June watched me work with an expression I had seen on Margaret's face. Gratitude so deep it looks like grief. The first night was hardest. 16 bodies in a stone room. Stove crackling. Wind screaming. Lily crying softly against her mother. Someone praying. Someone else snoring. Which felt like defiance against the universe. At midnight, I climbed to the watchroom. The storm had not weakened. Snow drifted against the north wall to door height. Temperature outside, calculated from wind speed and ambient readings, near -20. Neptune sat beside me in the dark. Through the uncovered window I saw nothing. White moving against black. The ocean out there somewhere, furious and invisible. "We are going to make it, Nep." He leaned against my leg. Below us 16 people were alive because a lantern had been burning in a window. Because an old man had a habit he could not break. I thought about Margaret. What she would say seeing this. Her husband at 23, stupid and convinced he could keep every light on the Atlantic burning forever. Now standing in a dark lighthouse with a dog and 16 strangers and a storm that wanted them all dead. She would have said what she always said when things got impossible. "You have got the helm, Frank. Do not let go." I did not let go. The storm lasted 4 days. I know because I counted every single hour in my notebook, marking time the way lighthouse keepers have done for 200 years. Tick marks on paper, each one a small victory against the dark. Day 2 was when Lily stopped talking. She had been quiet since Catherine carried her through the door. But on the second morning, she stopped responding entirely. Eyes open, breathing, but gone somewhere inside herself where the cold and the noise could not reach her. Catherine held her daughter and looked at me with the kind of fear that has no bottom. I knelt beside them, put my hand on Lily's forehead. Hot, not warm. Hot. The kind of heat that comes from a body fighting something it might not win. How long has she been like this? I asked. She was shivering all night. Then she stopped. Then she got warm. Stopped shivering. Got warm. Any engineer who has studied thermodynamics knows what that sequence means in a hypothermia case. The body quits trying to save itself. Core temperature drops so low the blood vessels near the skin dilate in a final confused response, flooding the surface with warmth that feels like recovery but is not. It is the body spending its last reserves. Lily was not getting better. She was shutting down. I had no medicine, no thermometer, no phone, no way to reach a hospital through winds that were still tearing shingles off rooftops and throwing them into the harbor like playing cards. What I had was 40 years of first aid training from remote lighthouse stations, where the nearest doctor was a 3-hour boat ride away, and the weather did not care about your schedule. I stripped Lily down to her undershirt. Catherine protested until I explained. Wet clothing holds cold against the skin. I wrapped the child in every dry piece of fabric I could find. My wool blanket, Theodore's donated flannel shirt that I had been using as a pillowcase, 2 dish towels from June Hathaway's coat pockets. I built a cocoon of dry insulation around a 7-year-old girl and positioned her between Neptune's body heat on one side and the stove on the other. Talk to her, I told Catherine. Do not stop talking. Tell her about home, about her room, about her favorite things. Keep her brain connected to something warm. Catherine talked. For 6 hours she talked. About Lily's stuffed rabbit named Captain. About the garden they were going to plant in spring. About pancakes on Sunday morning. And the way Lily always asked for extra blueberries. She talked until her voice cracked, and then she whispered, and when the whispers gave out she just hummed. A melody I did not recognize, but that sounded like something a mother invents when all other words have been used up. I checked Lily's pulse every 30 minutes, monitored her breathing, watched for the signs I had been trained to recognize. Confusion, irregular heartbeat, skin turning from red to gray. At hour 4, her temperature started to drop. Not the false warmth, the real temperature underneath. I could feel it through the blankets. She was losing. I made a decision that went against every piece of standard first aid training I had ever received. I heated water on the stove. Not hot. Warm. Body temperature warm. I soaked the dish towels and placed them against Lily's torso, under her arms, against her neck. Direct warmth transferred to the core. The textbooks say, do not do this because rapid rewarming can trigger cardiac arrest. But the textbooks assume you have an ambulance coming. I did not have an ambulance. I had warm water and a decision. Dominic watched me from across the room. You sure about that? No, I said. But I am sure about what happens if I do nothing. For 2 hours I rotated warm compresses, changed them every 15 minutes as they cooled, heated more water, changed again. My arms ached. My hands were red and raw from wringing towels. Neptune did not move from Lily's side. Not once. At hour 6, Lily blinked. She turned her head and looked at Neptune. Then she said one word. Dogt. Catherine made a sound that I will hear for the rest of my life. Something between a laugh and a sob and a prayer all compressed into a single breath. She grabbed her daughter so hard I thought she might undo all my work. Il est here, Holland. Some medicine does not come from textbooks. Lily's fever broke that night. Not completely. She was still warm, still weak. But her eyes were tracking. She was drinking water. She asked for Captain and cried when Catherine told her they had left the stuffed rabbit in the car. Neptune put his head on Lily's lap, and she wrapped both arms around his neck and fell asleep like that. Her face buried in the fur of a dog who had been starving under a wharf 2 months ago. Day 3. The wind dropped from roaring to howling. Still dangerous, but the rage was leaking out of it. I did a head count every 4 hours. 16 people. All breathing. All accounted for. Martin's head wound was healing clean. June had organized a prayer group in the corner that met every evening, and I did not have the heart or the desire to interrupt it, because whatever keeps people calm keeps them alive. The firewood was running low. I had calculated 4 days, and we were in day 3, with enough for maybe 36 more hours. I made the call to reduce the stove to maintenance level, 50 degrees instead of 55. 5 degrees does not sound like much until you are sleeping on a stone floor in wet clothes. Nobody complained. They trusted me. That trust was heavier than anything I had ever carried. Day 4. The wind died at 11 in the morning, like someone had turned off a switch. The silence was so sudden, it woke everyone who was sleeping. We lay there, listening to nothing. After 4 days of constant roaring, nothing sounded louder than everything. I opened the door. Snow had drifted to within 6 inches of the top of the frame. Beyond it, a white world. Gloucester had disappeared under 4 feet of snow. The harbor was choked with ice. Trees were down across every visible road. Power lines lay on the ground like dead snakes. But the sky was blue. Deep. Impossible. Heartbreaking blue. The kind of blue that only comes after the worst storms, as if the sky is apologizing. I stood in that doorway and felt the sun on my face for the first time in 4 days. Behind me, 16 people were getting to their feet. Catherine was carrying Lily, who had her arms around her mother's neck and was looking at the snow with wide eyes. Martin leaned on June. Dominic stood in the doorway beside me and put his hand on my shoulder without saying a word. Neptune walked out first. He stood in the snow up to his chest, lifted his nose to the sky, and barked. One sharp bark that echoed off the harbor and came back to us like an answer. We had made it. I looked down the outcrop toward the rail yard. The boxcar, my first shelter. The rusted steel box where I had survived my first night in Gloucester, was gone, ripped from the tracks by wind and thrown 30 feet into the rocks, crushed like a tin can under a boot. If I had stayed there, I would be dead. If these 16 people had not seen the lantern in the window, they might be dead too. I closed my notebook. Page after page of tick marks and calculations and rationing schedules and temperature readings and pulse counts. The record of 4 days in a lighthouse with 16 strangers and 1 dog and a stove that held and walls that did not break. I turned to a fresh page and wrote the date. Below it, 1 word. Alive. The rescue crews reached the lighthouse on the afternoon of day 5. National Guard trucks pushing through snow that had buried Gloucester like a white grave. They came with blankets and stretchers and thermoses of hot soup and the kind of organized efficiency that arrives after the worst is already over. A paramedic checked each of the 16 people. Martin Hathaway needed stitches for his head wound, but was stable. Lily Bell was dehydrated and running a low-grade fever, but responsive. Catherine would not let go of her daughter long enough for the paramedic to take a proper blood pressure reading. Everyone else was cold and hungry, and shaken but alive. All 16. The paramedic looked at me like I had pulled off a magic trick. "Who organized all this?" he asked, looking at the sleeping zones, the water station, the stove, the rationing chart I had pinned to the wall. "The building did most of the work," I said. "I just kept the fire going." That was the first lie I told in Gloucester. The building did not organize 16 strangers into a survival system. The building did not wrap a dying child in warm compresses for 6 hours. The building did not ration firewood down to the last split log. I did. But taking credit felt wrong when people were still shivering. so I gave it to the granite. The National Guard evacuated everyone to the high school gymnasium on Dale Avenue, which had been converted to an emergency shelter. Cots, generators, Red Cross volunteers, handing out water bottles and peanut butter sandwiches. I walked in carrying my duffel bag and my notebook with Neptune at my heels and felt the strangest sensation: loss. The lighthouse was empty now. The people were safe. My purpose had walked out the door with them. I found a cot in the corner and sat down. Neptune curled at my feet. I opened my notebook to the page that said "Alive" and stared at it until the letters blurred. The reporter found me 3 hours later. Her Name was Sarah Chen. Boston Globe. She had driven up from the city the moment the roads cleared, chasing the storm story the way reporters chase every disaster, looking for the human angle that turns weather into narrative. Someone at the gymnasium had pointed her toward me. Probably Catherine, who had been telling anyone who would listen about the lighthouse and the lantern and the old man who saved her daughter's life. "Mr. Calloway, I am writing about the storm response in Gloucester. Can I ask you a few questions?" I said yes because I did not know how to say no to a woman holding a notebook. "We are the same species, notebook people." She asked how I ended up in the lighthouse. I told her. Not the dramatic version, the facts. Sold my house for my son. Got kicked out. Found a boxcar. Found a lighthouse. Fixed it. Lit a lantern. People came. Sarah Chen wrote everything down. Then she asked the question that changed my life for the second time in 3 months. "Mr. Calloway, are you telling me that you were homeless, living in an abandoned lighthouse, and you single-handedly sheltered 16 people through a 4-day nor'easter?" I was not single-handed. I had a dog. She did not laugh. She wrote that down too. The story ran on the front page of the Boston Globe 3 days later. Above the fold, a photograph of Cape Ann Light that Sarah's photographer had taken from the harbor, the white tower standing against a gray sky, with snow piled to the doorframe, and the faint glow of my hurricane lantern still visible in the watchroom window. The headline read, "The Keeper's Light. Homeless veteran engineer saves 16 lives in historic nor'easter." I did not know I was a veteran until I read that headline. Technically, she was right. 40 years with the Coast Guard Aids to Navigation program. But I had never thought of myself that way. I was just a man who kept lights burning. The story went everywhere. The Globe's website. Then the Associated Press picked it up. Then CNN. Then the morning shows. Within a week, my face was on television screens I could not see because I was still sleeping on a cot in a gymnasium with a dog who needed a bath. The phone calls started coming to the gymnasium front desk. People wanting to donate money. People wanting to interview me. A production company from New York asking if I would be interested in telling my story on camera. Ruth Pemberton called twice. Once to tell me the Historical Society's phone had not stopped ringing. And once to tell me something that made me sit down on my cot so hard. Neptune jumped. "The Coast Guard called," she said. "The regional commander in Boston." He read the Globe article. "He wants to discuss an expedited transfer of Cape Ann Light." Expedited. I repeated. His word. Not mine. "Frank, I think they are going to give you the lighthouse." I held the phone and said nothing for a long time. Outside the gymnasium windows, Gloucester was slowly digging itself out. Snowplows grinding down Main Street. Shop owners shoveling sidewalks. The harbor still choked with ice, but the fishing boats were starting to move again. Life returning the way it always does after a storm. Slowly, and then all at once. "Frank, are you there?" "I am here, Ruth. Are you all right?" "I am trying to figure out how to feel about this." "Feel good." "You earned it." I hung up and looked at Neptune. He was watching me with those brown eyes that had seen me at my lowest and never once looked away. "They might give us the lighthouse, Nep." His tail thumped once against the gymnasium floor. "Yeah," I said. "That is how I feel about it too." The letters started arriving 3 days later. Forwarded to the gymnasium from the Globe. From the Historical Society. From the Gloucester post office, where someone had simply addressed an envelope, to the lighthouse man, Gloucester, Massachusetts, and the postmaster knew exactly where to send it. Letters from strangers. Hundreds of them. People who had lost homes. People who had been abandoned by their children. People who had rebuilt from nothing. People who just wanted to say they were glad I was alive. I read every single one. Sat on that cot with Neptune beside me and read them one by one until my eyes burned and my hands smelled like paper and ink. Some made me laugh. Some made me angry. Some I had to put down and walk away from because the weight of other people's pain is heavier than your own when you have already learned to carry yours. One letter had no return address. The handwriting was familiar. Messy. Slanting, left the way it always had since grade school. Dad. I saw the article. I am sorry. I do not know if that means anything, but I am sorry. Dylan. I folded the letter and put it in my coat pocket next to my notebook and the federal occupancy approval. 3 pieces of paper. The plan, the permission, and the beginning of something I was not ready to name. Neptune put his head on my knee. I scratched behind his ear the way Ruth had done that first day on the rocks. One thing at a time, boy. One thing at a time. The Coast Guard regional commander was a woman named Captain Diana Holt. She arrived in Gloucester on a Tuesday morning, driving a government sedan that looked as uncomfortable on the harbor road as she looked comfortable behind the wheel. Short gray hair, firm handshake, eyes that measured everything twice before forming an opinion. Ruth met her at the Historical Society office. I met her at the lighthouse. She stood at the base of Cape Ann Light and looked up the way people look up at things that have been standing longer than anyone alive. Then she looked at me. You are Frank Calloway. Yes, ma'am. 40 years aids to navigation. Penobscot Bay. Montauk. Cape Hatteras. Outer Banks. And Cape Ann. You read my file. I read your file. The Globe article, the 14 letters of community support, and the structural assessment you wrote. The assessment was better than most of what my engineers produce. She almost smiled. Do not tell them I said that. She asked to see the interior. I opened the iron door and let her walk through. She took her time, touched the sealed mortar, tested the staircase, examined the stove, the ventilation, the water system, stood in the watchroom and looked out at the harbor, climbed to the lantern room and ran her hand along the iron framework where the Fresnel lens used to sit. Neptune followed her the entire time, which I took as a good sign. He had growled at Whitfield. He had growled at Dylan. Captain Holt got the full escort treatment, tail included. When she came back down, she sat on the granite step outside the door and opened a folder. I am going to be straight with you, Mr. Calloway. The Coast Guard does not like giving away lighthouses. Every transfer sets a precedent, and precedents make lawyers nervous. But this situation is unusual for 3 reasons. She held up one finger. First, the structure has been significantly improved by your work. Our last inspection report from 2020 noted 14 critical maintenance deficiencies. Your assessment shows 3 remaining. All minor. You have done in 2 months what we could not budget for in 2 years. Second finger. The community support is documented and genuine. 14 letters. A preservation application filed by the Historical Society with full structural, plumbing, and historical documentation. The application is one of the most thorough we have received under the Preservation Act. Third finger. You sheltered 16 people in this lighthouse during a storm that killed 4 people in Essex County. The governor mentioned it in his emergency briefing. CNN ran the story for 3 days. If we evict you now, the optics are not something my commanding officer wants to explain at a press conference. She closed the folder. Under Section 208 of the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act, I am authorized to recommend an expedited transfer of Cape Ann Light to a qualified individual for preservation purposes. The transfer includes the structure, the surrounding land parcel of approximately 1/4 acre, and the access easement from Harbor Road. I heard the words. Each one landed like a stone being placed in a foundation. There are conditions, she continued. You maintain the structure to Coast Guard historical preservation standards. You file an annual inspection report. You allow public access to the grounds during daylight hours. And you do not modify the exterior without written approval. I would not change a thing about the exterior, I said. I spent 40 years keeping these towers looking exactly the way they were built. I know you did. This time, she did smile. The paperwork will take 60 to 90 days. During that time, your provisional occupancy remains in effect. When the transfer is complete, Cape Ann Light will be yours. Legally. Permanently. She stood, brushed granite dust off her uniform pants, and extended her hand. I shook it. Her grip was the kind that comes from years of earning authority instead of inheriting it. One more thing, she said. The Fresnel lens. Third order. It is in the Portland Maritime Museum, on permanent loan from us. I know. I supervised the removal. If you wanted to request its return as part of the preservation plan, I would not object. A lighthouse without its lens is like a library without books. She walked up the harbor path to her sedan. Ruth was standing at the top, waiting. I could see them talking. Ruth's hands moving the way they did when she was excited. Captain Holt nodded once, got in her car, and drove away. Ruth came down the rocks faster than a woman her age should move on granite. She said yes. She said yes. Ruth grabbed my arm. Frank. She said yes. The lighthouse is yours. I sat down on the step because my legs decided they were finished holding me up. Neptune climbed into my lap, all 25 pounds of him, and licked my face. I let him. Some moments are too big for dignity. That evening I climbed the 51 steps to the lantern room for the last time as a guest. The next time I climbed them, I would be climbing them as the owner, the keeper, the man whose name would be on the deed of a lighthouse built in 1861 by men who believed that keeping a light burning was worth the trouble of building a tower on a rock. The sun was setting over the harbor. Gold light on the water. Fishing boats coming home. Gloucester emerging from under the snow, like a town remembering itself. I could see Mabel's store. Theodore's yellow Victorian. The boatyard where Patrick's lights were still on because there were always boats that needed fixing. The spot on the rail yard where my boxcar used to sit, now just an empty stretch of track with bent rails and scattered debris. Everything I had been through was visible from this room. Every step, every fall, every repair. My phone rang. Ruth had loaned me a prepaid cell phone after the Globe article, insisting that a man who was about to own a lighthouse needed to be reachable. The number on the screen was Dylan's. I stared at it for 4 rings. Neptune watched me. The harbor went gold to orange, to pink. I answered, Dad. His voice was different. Smaller. Younger. Like the boy on the boat. Dylan, I got a job. At the boatyard. Patrick hired me. I started yesterday. I closed my eyes. The sunset burned orange through my eyelids. 12 an hour, he said. My hands are already bleeding. They will stop bleeding after the first week. Silence. The kind that is full instead of empty. Can I come see the lighthouse? He asked. I looked out at Cape Ann Light's shadow stretching across the water. My lighthouse. My light. Built by men I never met. Maintained by men like me. Saved by a man who had nothing left except the knowledge of how to keep things standing. Sunday, I said. Come Sunday. Bring work gloves. There is still a lot to do. Okay, Dad. Okay, son. I hung up and sat in the lantern room with Neptune until the last light left the sky, and the stars came out one by one, like lanterns being lit across an ocean that never stops moving. Dylan came on Sunday morning at 7:15. I know because I was standing in the lantern room watching the harbor road when his truck appeared around the bend. Not the expensive one Vanessa used to ride in. A beat-up Ford with rust on the wheel wells and a crack across the windshield that looked like a river on a map. A working man's truck. He had bought it or borrowed it. And either way, it was a step in a direction I recognized. Neptune heard the engine before I saw the headlights. His ears went forward, but he did not growl. That meant something. Dogs do not forget, but they do recalibrate. I climbed down the 51 steps and opened the iron door. The morning was cold but clean. February air that tasted like salt and pine. The harbor was still half frozen, but the ice was thinning at the edges the way it does when the season starts to turn. Not spring yet, but the memory of spring. The promise that the cold would not last forever. Dylan parked on the gravel pull-off and got out. He was wearing jeans, work boots, and a canvas jacket that looked like it came from the same thrift store where I had bought my wool blanket. His hands were wrapped in white athletic tape, the blisters from his first week at the boatyard. I remembered my own hands at 23, raw and cracked and bleeding after my first month on a lighthouse scaffold. The tape was the same. The pain was the same. The lesson was the same. He walked down the rocks carrying a paper bag. Mabel said to give you these. He held out the bag. Inside were 2 blueberry muffins, still warm, wrapped in wax paper. Mabel does not bake, I said. She does now. She said you earned it. We stood there. Father and son. The lighthouse behind me, the harbor in front of us, and between us, the kind of distance that cannot be measured in feet. He looked at Cape Ann Light the way people look at something they did not expect to be real. You built this? I restored it. Men better than me built it in 1861. It looks incredible, Dad. I wanted to say something sharp. Something about how incredible things can happen when you are thrown into the cold with nothing. But the engineering part of my brain, the part that calculates load and stress and knows exactly how much pressure a structure can take before it breaks, that part told me this was not the moment for weight. This was the moment for foundation. Come inside, I said. I gave him the tour the way I would give it to anyone. Ground level. The sealed walls, the sleeping alcove, the workbench, the stove I built from a 50-gallon drum, the copper pipe water system George and I had run from the rain barrel, the watch room with the planning desk and the windows I had replaced, the lantern room where the iron framework stood empty, waiting for the Fresnel lens that Captain Holt had promised to help bring home. Dylan touched the walls, ran his hand along the mortar the way I had done the first day, tested the staircase railing, stood in the lantern room, and looked out at the 360-degree view of the Atlantic, and did not say anything for a long time. Mom would have loved this, he said finally. She would have told me the curtains were wrong. He laughed. It was short and broken and surprised, like something escaping from a room that had been locked for months. I had not heard my son laugh since before Margaret got sick. The sound hit me harder than the cold ever did. We ate the muffins sitting on the granite step outside the door. Neptune sat between us, accepting pieces from both sides with the diplomatic neutrality of a dog who has learned that humans are complicated and food is simple. The harbor was waking up. A lobster boat chugged past the breakwater trailing diesel smoke and seagulls. Somewhere on Main Street, a snowplow scraped the last of the storm off the pavement. Dad, I need to say something. Then say it. I am sorry. He stared at his taped hands. Not the letter sorry. The real one. Face to face. I am sorry I called you dead weight. I am sorry I let Vanessa convince me you were a burden. I am sorry I sold your home and then threw you out of mine. I am sorry I called the Coast Guard. I am sorry for all of it. Each sentence landed. I let them land. Did not interrupt. Did not soften. Did not wave it away the way fathers sometimes do, because forgiveness is easier than feeling. I know, I said. Do you forgive me? I looked at the harbor, at the boats, at the ice thinning on the water, at the lighthouse standing behind us, solid and patient, the way it had stood for 165 years through every storm the Atlantic could throw at it. Forgiveness is not a door you walk through once, Dylan. It is a road, long one, and you have to walk it. Not just say you will. I will walk it. Then start by showing up. Not once. Not when it is convenient. Every day. The way I showed up to this lighthouse every morning at 4:30 when it was dark and cold and nobody was watching. I will. $12 an hour. Bleeding hands. A truck with a cracked windshield. That is where the road starts. He nodded. Not the quick nod of a man agreeing to end a conversation. The slow nod of a man accepting weight he had been avoiding. We sat in silence for a while. The good kind. The kind that does not need filling because what is already there is enough. I brought work gloves, he said. You said there was still a lot to do. There is always a lot to do. I stood up. My knees cracked the way they always do. I handed him Mabel's dead husband's claw hammer, the one she had given me the day I started restoring the lighthouse. The handle was worn smooth from 6 weeks of my grip. It felt strange to pass it to someone else. Strange and right. The watch room needs new shelving. Lumber is stacked against the north wall. Measurements are in my notebook. Page 47. Dylan took the hammer. Held it the way a man holds something he understands is worth more than its weight. Then he walked inside and I heard his boots on the stone floor, followed by the sound of lumber being moved and measured and cut. Neptune looked up at me, tail wagging. I scratched behind his ear. One nail at a time, Nep. From inside the lighthouse, the sound of hammering began. Steady, careful. The rhythm of a man learning to build something instead of breaking it. I picked up my trowel and went back to the mortar. The south wall had 3 gaps I had been meaning to seal. The wind came off the water cold and clean, carrying the sound of my son's hammer and the smell of the ocean and the distant cry of gulls circling the harbor like they were keeping watch over something worth protecting. For the first time in 3 months, the lighthouse did not feel like mine alone. It felt like ours. The transfer papers arrived on a Wednesday in April. Ruth brought them to the lighthouse in a manila envelope she held with both hands like it contained something alive. Which, in a way, it did. I signed my name on 7 pages. Frank Calloway. The same signature I had put on 40 years of inspection reports, maintenance logs, and decommission orders. But this time the pen felt different in my hand, heavier, like the ink carried weight that would outlast me. Cape Ann Light was mine. Ruth witnessed the signature. Jim Prescott witnessed it too. Standing in the doorway with his harbor master jacket zipped to his chin, even though April in Gloucester is cold but not that cold. I think he just liked the jacket. Some men wear their purpose on the outside. Congratulations, Frank, Jim said. You are officially the most stubborn man in Essex County. Second most stubborn, I said. The lighthouse held out longer than I did. That evening the community came. Not because I invited them, because Gloucester is the kind of town where news travels through walls the way cold travels through steel. And by 4 in the afternoon half the harbor knew that the lighthouse had an owner again. Mabel brought chowder in a pot so large Dominic had to help her carry it down the rocks. Theodore brought bread and a bottle of wine he had been saving for an occasion he could not name until now. George Haddad brought nothing but showed up in clean clothes, which for George was the equivalent of a 3-piece suit. Patrick Donnelly came with Emma, who immediately claimed Neptune as her personal property, and spent the evening feeding him bread crusts on the watchroom stairs. Ruth gave a short speech about the historical significance of Cape Ann Light and the importance of preservation. She used words like heritage and stewardship and legacy, and I listened to all of them and thought about simpler words. Home. Safe. Mine. Captain Holt had included a personal note with the transfer papers. 1 sentence. Keep the light burning, Mr. Calloway. I had pinned it to the wall above my workbench where I could see it every morning. Sarah Chen came too. Not to write a story this time. Just to see. She stood in the lantern room and looked out at the Atlantic and said it was the most beautiful view she had ever seen. I told her she should see it during a nor'easter. She said she would pass. Dylan was there. He had been coming every Sunday for 6 weeks. Sometimes Saturdays, too. The watchroom shelving was finished. Solid pine, level to within a 16th of an inch, which I checked with my tape measure because I could not help myself, and because precision matters even when love is involved. He had started on the exterior, scraping old paint, priming the areas where salt had eaten through to bare wood. His hands were calloused now. The tape was gone. The blisters had become the kind of hard skin that only comes from showing up. He stood in the corner of the ground level during the gathering, holding a cup of chowder, and watching me the way a man watches someone he is still learning to see clearly. I caught his eye once. He nodded. I nodded back. That was enough. Some conversations happen without words, and are better for it. The crowd left as the sun went down. Mabel kissed me on the cheek, which she had never done before, and which made Neptune bark in what I choose to believe was approval. Theodore shook my hand, and held it for 3 seconds longer than necessary. George looked at the plumbing one more time on his way out, shook his head at a joint that met his standards but not his ideals, and left without saying goodbye because George does not say goodbye. He just leaves and comes back. Dylan was the last to go. He stood at the iron door with his jacket zipped and his keys in his calloused hand. "Same time Sunday?" he asked. "Same time Sunday." He paused. "Dad, I want you to know something. I am paying the mortgage now. 2 months caught up. I got a second shift at the boatyard. Patrick has me learning diesel repair. Good. I am doing it the way you said. 1 nail at a time. That is the only way anything gets built, son." He walked up the rocks to his truck. The Ford with the cracked windshield and the rust on the wheel wells. A working man's truck going home after a working man's day. I watched the taillights disappear around the bend and felt something settle in my chest like ballast finding its place in a hull. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Forgiveness was still walking, still on the road, but it was moving, and the direction was right. Neptune and I climbed the 51 steps one more time. The lantern room was dark. The iron framework stood empty against the evening sky. But not for long. Ruth had confirmed that the Fresnel lens would be returned from Portland within the month, third order. The same lens I had turned off in 2019. The same light that had guided ships into Gloucester Harbor for 158 years. I stood where the lens would sit and looked out at the Atlantic. The water was turning from blue to silver to black as the last light drained from the sky. Stars appeared, one by one, patient, constant. The same stars that shone on the men who built this tower, on the keepers who climbed these stairs before me, on Margaret when she stood on the shore waiting for me to come home from a 6-week rotation on a rock in the middle of the sea. "I kept the light, Margaret," I whispered. "Not the one in the tower, the one you put in me." Neptune pressed against my leg. I put my hand on his head. Below us, the ocean moved against the rocks the way it always has and always will. Indifferent to the small dramas of the people who build their lives along its edge. But not cruel. Never cruel. Just constant. The way a good foundation is constant. The way granite holds, even when the storm wants it to break. I reached into my pocket and took out my notebook. Worn now. Water-stained. Pages filled with measurements and calculations and rationing charts and tick marks and the small, precise records of a man rebuilding his life the only way he knew how. One number at a time. One wall at a time. One nail at a time. I turned to the last page. Blank. Waiting. I wrote 2 lines. The light comes back. It always does. Then I closed the notebook, put it in my pocket, and went downstairs to feed my dog.